Welcome back to Undercover Mysteries. What happens when an open-water certified diver plunges into a dark cave, one with a long history of tragedy? All it takes is one critical moment, and everything changes. As always, viewer discretion is strongly advised. In the misty hills of Kodak Canal, Tamil Nadu, at a height of 7,317 feet, 2,230 meters above sea level, there's a spot locals avoid after dark. Known as the Devil's Kitchen by them, tourists call it the Guna Caves. The caves weren't always called Guna. For generations, they were simply the Devil's Kitchen, a maze of giant granite boulders piled up to form narrow passages, dark chambers, and deep pits that drop straight down into the mountain. In 1991, though, a thriller movie called Guna was filmed there, and the name stuck. The movie made the caves famous, but fame didn't make them any safer. By 2006, 13 people had fallen into the caves and disappeared. Most of their bodies were never found. Locals would tell you strange stories about how the caves seemed to call people in. Tourists would wander off from their groups, drawn deeper into the darkness, and simply vanish. The forest department had put up fences and signs to warn visitors, but the signs were in Tamil, a language most tourists didn't understand. The danger in the Guna Caves wasn't just one thing, it was everything. The moss-covered rocks were slippery, the passages were confusing and twisted. There were holes in the floor, some barely visible in the dim light, that dropped over 100 feet straight down into chambers no one had fully explored. If you fell into one of those pits, there was no coming back. Rescue teams had tried, but they had never succeeded. That was the reputation the Devil's Kitchen had when on September 3, 2006, 9 friends from Mujmal, Kerala decided to visit. They were called the Mujmal Boys, a close-knit group of painters and workers from the Dharana Arts Club near Kochi. They pooled their money and traveled to the hill station of Kodaikanal. Suju David, known as Kutan, was the leader of the group. At 26, he was older than most of the others. Then there was 19-year-old Subhash Chandran, quiet and artistic, the youngest of the bunch. Before they left for the caves that morning, Subhash had grabbed his younger brother's belt from the wall. They had a brief argument over it, just a small thing, but sometimes little moments like that can shape everything. The group arrived at the Guna Caves around noon. The place was incredible. Huge boulders formed cathedral-like spaces with shafts of sunlight streaming through the gaps. The whole area was shrouded in that famous Kodaikanal mist. They saw the fence. It was broken in places, easy to step over. They noticed the warning sign, but it was in Tamil, and since they were from Kerala, they couldn't understand it. So they went in. At first, it was everything they'd hoped for. They explored the chambers, took photos, and even carved Mujmal Boys 2006 into one of the rock walls.
The caves felt like their own secret adventure, a story the friends would tell for years. But as they explored, something strange happened. They had arrived as a group of 9, but now they were down to 8. Subhash had disappeared. One moment he was there, the next he was gone. No noise, no warning, just empty space where he had been. Abhilash John was the first to notice. He had been standing next to Subhash, and suddenly there was just silence and an empty space. The group rushed over, and on the spot where Subhash had been standing was a hole about 3 feet, 1 meter wide, its edges hidden by shadows and moss. They shone their phone lights into it, but the beams disappeared into nothingness. There was no bottom, no sound, just dark emptiness. Some of the friends ran to get help, while others stayed behind, calling into the hole, hoping for an answer. They ran to a nearby shop, breathless and terrified. The shopkeeper, Arumugam, listened quietly, and all the color drained from his face. "Devil's Kitchen," he said softly. "No one comes back from there. 13 people have fallen in." He didn't finish the sentence, but made a gesture that said it all, that their friend was now part of that grim history. Still, he agreed to show them the way back. Meanwhile, other friends rushed to the police station to report what had happened. The police inspector's first reaction wasn't sympathy, but suspicion. He thought they had murdered their friend and were making up the story. But soon it became clear this wasn't the case. By the time the authorities reached the caves, hours had passed, and the rain had begun, cold and heavy. The police, fire department, and forest officials stood around the hole, shaking their heads. A fire officer lowered a rope and called into the darkness. It felt more like routine than hope. Everyone there knew the reputation of the place. Then they heard it. Faint, weak, almost unrecognizable, but unmistakable, a cry from deep below. Subhash was still alive. Earlier, he had stepped forward, unaware that the rock under his feet was slippery with moisture and loose soil. His foot pressed down, and suddenly the ground gave way. There was no time to shout, no moment to react. The earth crumbled silently, and he fell into the gap, disappearing into the dark. He fell without a sound, his arms scraping the jagged walls as he tried to grab anything to stop his fall. But the shaft was too narrow, the rock too smooth. Then, with a violent jolt, his belt, the same one he had argued with his brother about, caught on a sharp edge. The force twisted him, slamming his shoulder and head against the walls. The pain was intense, but it stopped the fall, saving his life. Now wedged deep in the crevice, motionless and breathless, he could barely move. When he was finally located, the officials estimated, from how faint his voice sounded, that he had fallen at least 120 feet, 36.5 meters, the height of a 12-story building, a fall that should have killed him instantly. The firemen did what they could from the surface. They lowered a longer rope and called for Subhash to tie it around himself, but he didn't respond. He had passed out. They discussed pumping oxygen or calling for equipment from other cities, but deep down, everyone knew that by the time any help arrived, Subhash would be gone. David watched, knowing that none of these trained professionals were willing to go down. They were terrified, and rightfully so. But David wasn't about to give up on his friend, so he made up his mind. He would go in. The police immediately protested, warning him that he wasn't trained and the oxygen levels would kill him, but David refused to back down. At 4 p.m., 3 hours after Subhash had fallen, David tied a 50-foot rope around himself and descended into the Devil's Kitchen. The descent was a nightmare. The hole was barely wide enough for him to fit, and the walls were slippery with moss. At about 120 feet, 36.5 meters, deeper than any rescue had ever gone, David finally found Subhash. Subhash was lying on a narrow ledge, twisted and bloody, in a pool of black water, but he was breathing. David carefully climbed onto the ledge, which barely fit one person. Subhash's eyes snapped open, wild and frightened. David managed to calm him enough to tie the rope around Subhash's body and signal to the surface that they were ready to ascend. The climb back up took another hour. Every inch was painful. The rope scraped against rocks, and Subhash kept losing consciousness. When they finally emerged, almost 6 hours later, a cheer erupted from the crowd that had gathered. Subhash was rushed to the hospital, unconscious but alive. David collapsed, exhausted and shaken. What no one knew was that Subhash had become the first person in history to survive a fall into the Guna Caves. The Majumdar boys were charged with trespassing and fined 2,500 rupees, but the real pain came later. They all agreed not to tell the full story. When people asked, they said Subhash had fallen from a waterfall to protect him and his family. Subhash spent 60 days recovering. He had nightmares so bad that he needed 6 months of therapy. His mother blamed David, not knowing the truth, only that her son had returned broken. Eventually, when she learned what really happened, she apologized to David. In 2008, David received India's Jivendra Padak Award for bravery. Hidden deep inside West Skiles Peacock Springs State Park lies the Orange Grove Sink, a calm green pool that conceals one of Florida's most challenging underwater cave systems. At the surface, it looks ordinary,
a small pond covered with duckweed and surrounded by tall cypress trees, but beneath it stretches a maze of submerged tunnels connecting to the massive Peacock Springs cave network, one of the largest in the world. This sink is a training ground and a test of nerve for experienced cave divers. Its passages twist through narrow limestone corridors, often with zero visibility once silt is stirred. A single safety line guides divers through the darkness, and losing it can mean being trapped in a cold, silent maze with no way out. Orange Grove has seen its share of tragedies. Over the years, several divers have lost their lives after pushing too far beyond their limits. Each incident serves as a reminder of how unforgiving this system can be. Even a small mistake can turn fatal. Because of that, strict certification is required to dive here, and the site is now carefully managed to prevent further accidents. Despite its dangers, the Orange Grove Sink attracts explorers from around the world. They come for its crystal-clear water, the ancient rock formations, and the unmatched experience of swimming through a piece of geological history carved over thousands of years. September 5, 1988. The Florida sun had long dipped below the horizon, leaving the dense woods of Suwannee County cloaked in darkness. The still surface of Orange Grove Sink reflected only the faint light of their flashlights, as Mark Happy and 21-year-old Debbie Eves prepared for what would become their final dive. It was already late, 10:11 p.m., and this would be their third dive of the day. Both divers were still in the early stages of their cave diving experience. Mark had received his basic cave certification just 4 months earlier, and Debbie had earned hers in early July, barely 2 months before that night. When Mark and Debbie discussed their plan with other experienced cave divers earlier that day, they were strongly warned not to attempt the dive. Despite these warnings, they decided to continue. Their plan was to enter Orange Grove, swim through the main passage, and make their way toward a connecting system known as Challenge Sink. They agreed that if visibility began to drop due to silt, they would turn back immediately. On paper, it sounded cautious, but in reality, their dive plan already included several red flags.
For one, Debbie's primary dive light wasn't expected to last the full duration of the dive. Instead of replacing it or shortening the dive time, they decided she would switch to a UK 1200 backup light mid-dive once her main one failed. It was a risky idea, especially in a cave environment, where even a brief distraction could result in losing contact with the safety guideline. At around 10:30 p.m., the two descended through the still water of Orange Grove Sink. The beam from their lights cut through the darkness as they followed the main guideline into the underwater passages. Everything initially went according to plan. The visibility was good, the water was calm, and the line was easy to follow. They ventured deeper, passing the halfway point of their planned route, well beyond the range where emergency air reserves could guarantee a safe exit. Not long after, silting began. Even small movements of fins or tanks brushing the cave floor can send fine particles of sediment into suspension. Within minutes, the clear water turned cloudy and visibility dropped dramatically. Following their plan, Mark and Debbie decided to turn back. But as they began their return journey, the dive took a dangerous turn. Debbie's primary light dimmed, then went out completely. They stopped to exchange her failed light for the backup, a simple enough procedure in open water, but in a dark, confined space with little experience, it became a serious problem. During the light exchange, they drifted away from the main guideline. That single mistake would determine the outcome of their dive. In the total blackness of the cave, the line was their only lifeline, the one thing connecting them to the exit. Without it, even a small silt disturbance could turn the cave into a featureless void. With the backup light now working, they began searching for the line and soon found one. Believing it was the same line they had followed in, they started heading back. But the line they found wasn't the same one. Cave systems like Orange Grove often have multiple lines laid out by different divers or for separate routes. To inexperienced divers, these lines look identical. As Mark and Debbie followed the wrong line, the passages began to look unfamiliar. The shapes of the walls, the flow of water, none of it matched their memory of the way in. Realizing something was wrong, they stopped and used an underwater slate to communicate. Debbie wrote that the passage didn't look familiar, and Mark agreed.
They turned around, hoping to find their original line, but the silt from their movements only made things worse. Visibility dropped again until there was nothing but murky black water surrounding them. Amid the confusion, Debbie spotted what appeared to be another guideline in the distance. Without verifying whether it connected to their original route, she made a quick decision. She swam toward it. But in doing so, she let go of the line they were holding. That moment sealed her fate.
The water exploded into a full silt-out, where visibility drops to absolute zero. The light from their lamps reflected only off a wall of suspended sediment. Mark could no longer see Debbie, though she was likely only a few feet away. He began a line search, sweeping his arm methodically in small circles, trying to find either the lost line or his partner. Time slipped by quickly, and with no sign of Debbie and his air supply running low, Mark faced an impossible choice: stay and die, or leave to get help. He made the agonizing decision to exit. Feeling along the rock, he eventually found another guideline, this time the correct one. He followed it carefully, the faint glow of the surface finally appearing after a long, tense ascent. When Mark surfaced, he immediately alerted authorities. Rescue and recovery divers, professionals familiar with the system, were dispatched to the site. Using Mark's account, they retraced the likely path Debbie had taken. Hours later, deep inside one of the silted passages, they found her lifeless body, floating near a junction of two guidelines. Her tank was empty. The silt had finally settled, but too late to make any difference. The tragedy at Orange Grove Sink was not caused by equipment failure or bad luck. It was a chain of small, critical decisions made under pressure. Inexperienced divers often underestimate how deceptive this cave can be. Its wide, clear entrance gives a false sense of safety. But deeper inside, the tunnels narrow, visibility drops, and panic sets in fast. Many who entered weren't fully certified for cave diving, relying on open water training that doesn't prepare them for zero light in closed conditions. Even a slight deviation from the guideline could lead to getting lost in total darkness. In most cases, the cause came down to overconfidence, poor planning, or pushing limits in a place that punishes mistakes instantly. Every fatal dive at Orange Grove Sink could have been prevented with discipline and respect for cave diving rules. Strict certification requirements exist for a reason. They teach divers to handle emergencies when visibility drops to zero or when equipment fails deep underground. Using redundant air tanks, proper guideline techniques, and dive planning within air and depth limits are basic principles that save lives.